I would argue that the most serious threat to the United States is not someone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan or Pakistan, but our own fiscal irresponsibility.
The President of the United States.
These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions.
America may be headed for a recession.
And I must say to you that the state of the Union is not good.
We are engaged in a long and hard fight against inflation.
Our trade deficit is too large.
Part of our trouble is that we have been self-indulgent, and now the bill has come due.
Unless we act forcefully, and now, the economy will get worse.
But I pledge to you tonight that the full powers of this government will be used to keep America's economy producing.
What we need is spending discipline in Washington, D.C.
And thus restore balance to our economy.
We will continue along the path toward a balanced budget.
Once it's balanced, we will start paying off the national debt.
And now we are on course for budget surpluses for the next 25 years.
A stronger nation and economy requires more than a balanced budget.
Only a true partnership between government and the people can ever hope to reach these goals.
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow.
We must solve problems, not leave them to future generations.
We won't leave it to our children and our grandchildren.
We must not go back to unwise spending.
We must strive to break the calamitous cycle and help dispel the uncertainty that so many feel about our economy.
And tonight, that cause goes on. God bless.
How can this be happening to the richest country in the world?
We are. Well, we've lost our way, quite frankly. Let me tell you how we got to where we are. Today's federal debt is the sum of all of our annual budget deficits and surpluses going back to the beginning of our federal government. Our war for independence created much of our early debt, and by March 4th, 1789, the first day of our federal government, our national debt was $75 million, which was about 40% of our economy. This terrified our founding fathers, and they acted quickly to pay it down. We didn't stay there for long. The Civil War not only had a huge human cost, it brought the United States to the brink of bankruptcy. However, like before, we paid our debt down quickly. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was created to help manage the nation's money supply and to oversee national banks. That year was also the birth of the modern income tax. World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Several years later, the Great Depression brought with it extreme economic hardship for millions of Americans.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 millions of our citizens.
It is insurance that you and your employer have bought and paid for.
World War II was a time of sacrifice, and while the government took on unprecedented levels of debt, Americans bought savings bonds to finance our winning the war.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Humphrey Bogart.
Our fighting men have just won history's greatest victory for freedom. Buy bonds for their future and for your own future.
We've got another bond to buy.
It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
The large military and social spending practices of the 1960s and 70s were two key factors that led to a major economic downturn by the end of the 1970s. The 1980s saw the rise of supply-side economics.
It's morning again in America.
Reaganomics.
You're the trickle-down theory guy.
I'm betting my reputation on it.
The controversial Laffer curve proposed that lower marginal tax rates would eventually generate higher tax revenues. The theory did have its critics.
Let me just give you a difference that I have with Governor Reagan on taxes. It is what I call a voodoo economic policy.
For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present.
Read my lips.
The debate over supply-side economics continues to this day. But what is not debatable is that the federal debt exploded in the 1980s. A fundamental shift had occurred. America was becoming addicted to debt. Never before in our history had so much debt been created during an era of relative peace and prosperity. Yes, the Cold War ended, but it came at an extremely high price, and people from across the political spectrum were becoming very alarmed. Our federal financial problem is worse today than it was in 1992, but back then the media, business leaders, along with Ross Perot and Paul Tsongas, made fiscal responsibility a key issue during the presidential campaign. The country woke up, recognized the challenge, and demanded change.
We come here today, Democrats and Republicans, to celebrate a true milestone for our nation. In a few moments, I will sign into law the first balanced budget in a generation.
The politics of sound fiscal policy are very difficult because the natural inertia in the political system, if you will, is toward federal programs, most of which are very useful. And therefore the inertia is towards spending on the one hand and tax cuts on the other hand. But if you're going to have sound fiscal conditions, you have got to both constrain your spending and you also have to provide for adequate revenues. And what ultimately is involved are very difficult trade-off decisions involving federal programs and what the American people want their government to do, and then providing the means to pay for it.
Do you think there's a risk of a recession? How do you rate that?
You know, you need to talk to economists. I think I got a B in Econ 101. I got an A, however, in keeping taxes low and being fiscally responsible with the people's money. States and our allies have prevailed.
Some people think that we can solve our financial problems by stopping fraud, waste, and abuse, or by canceling the Bush tax cuts, or by ending the war in Iraq. The truth is, we could do all three of these things, and we would not come close to solving our nation's fiscal challenges.